Aiko sat on the tatami mat, gazing at her husband Hiroshi as he ate in silence. The ticking of the wall clock sounded louder than ever. It hadn't always been like this. Their evenings were once filled with laughter, shared dreams, and whispered plans for the future. But now, Hiroshi's work consumed him. His long hours at the finance company left him exhausted, and their conversations had dwindled to routine exchanges about bills and groceries. Aiko felt invisible. She had tried to rekindle the connection, but Hiroshi seemed oblivious. The stress of their finances only added to the tension. The decision to take on a part-time job wasn't just about money. It was about escaping. She needed something to break the monotony, a reason to leave the house and feel useful. Her first day at the publishing company brought a mix of nerves and excitement. That was when she met Ryota Takashi, her boss. In his early 40s, he was sharp in a suit and radiated confidence. His warm smile and firm handshake immediately put her at ease. "Welcome to the team, Aiko," he said. "Let me know if you need anything." That simple gesture, so professional yet personal, stayed with her. It was the first time in months that someone had truly looked at her, not through her, but at her. Over the next few weeks, Aiko grew accustomed to the rhythm of the office. Ryota, though busy, had a knack for making everyone feel valued. Unlike Hiroshi, who often dismissed her concerns, Ryota seemed genuinely interested in her opinions. One afternoon, as Aiko struggled with a tricky spreadsheet, Ryota came over to her desk, extending a hand. His fingers brushed hers as he pointed to the screen, showing her a shortcut she hadn't known. The gesture was brief, but it made her pulse race. "You've got this," he said with a wink. Aiko's heart fluttered. She told herself it was nothing. He was just being kind. But the warmth of his smile lingered long after he walked away. By the third month, the dynamic between Aiko and Ryota had shifted. Their conversations became more frequent, filled with jokes and light teasing. During coffee breaks, Ryota often found reasons to sit near her, drawing her into discussions that went beyond work. "You're always so focused," he remarked one day. "It's refreshing to see someone take pride in their work." Aiko blushed. Hiroshi rarely complimented her anymore, and hearing those words from Ryota felt like a balm to her bruised ego. One day, while passing a stapler, their fingers brushed again. Neither of them pulled away immediately. The contact was brief but charged, leaving Aiko breathless. She couldn't deny it any longer. She was drawn to him. The turning point came during a late-night overtime session. The office was quiet, and the glow of the city lights cast shadows on the walls. Ryota brought 2 cups of coffee to Aiko's desk, his expression unusually serious. "You've been quiet lately," he observed. "Everything okay?" Aiko hesitated but eventually opened up, pouring out her frustrations, her loneliness, her strained marriage, her growing sense of inadequacy. She hadn't meant to, but Ryota's attentive gaze and gentle nods encouraged her. "Marriage is hard," he said softly, "but it sounds like you're doing your best." His words felt like a lifeline. In that moment, Aiko felt seen, understood. When their eyes met, there was an unspoken understanding between them, a fragile yet undeniable connection. The following week, Ryota invited Aiko to lunch, supposedly to discuss a new project. She agreed, telling herself it was purely professional, but as they sat in a cozy corner of a quiet restaurant, their conversation veered into personal territory. Ryota spoke about his own struggles, his failed marriage, the loneliness of leadership, the pressure to always have the answers. For the first time, Aiko saw him not just as her boss, but as a man with vulnerabilities. Their conversation lingered long after their plates were cleared. Aiko laughed more that afternoon than she had in months. When Ryota walked her back to the office, his hand lightly touched the small of her back, sending a shiver down her spine. It happened again during another late evening, when they were alone in the elevator after a meeting. The silence between them crackled with tension. When the elevator jolted to a sudden stop, Aiko stumbled, and Ryota instinctively reached out to steady her. His hands on her arms were firm yet gentle. "Are you okay?" he asked. His voice barely audible. Aiko nodded, yet neither of them moved away. Their faces were mere inches apart, and for a fleeting moment, the world outside the elevator seemed to vanish. The door's opening interrupted the moment, but the memory of his touch lingered with her. That night, as Aiko lay next to her sleeping husband, her thoughts were consumed by Ryota. The following week, Ryota asked Aiko to stay late for another project deadline. It had become routine, yet the air between them was charged with tension. They worked side by side, their proximity intensifying the feeling. When Aiko reached for a file on Ryota's desk, their hands brushed and she froze. He didn't pull away. Instead, his fingers gently lingered on hers, warm and comforting. Aiko, Ryota began, his voice almost a whisper, I need to tell you something. Her heart raced as he moved closer. I can't stop thinking about you, he confessed, locking his gaze with hers. Aiko's breath caught in her throat. Ryota, she started, but her words faltered as he gently cupped her cheek, his lips grazing hers. It started tentative, then deepened as she responded. When they finally pulled away, guilt overwhelmed her. This is wrong, she murmured, though her trembling voice betrayed her conflicting emotions. Ryota stepped back, his expression one of regret. You're right, he said. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. But Aiko stopped him with a single look. Her emotions were a storm of fear, excitement, and longing. In the days that followed, both Aiko and Ryota distanced themselves, each struggling with the weight of what had happened. But the space between them only fueled their desire. One evening, as the office emptied, Ryota approached her desk. Can we talk? He asked earnestly. They found themselves in the conference room, and finally, the tension reached its breaking point. Aiko confessed her growing feelings for him, and Ryota admitted he felt the same. But what about Hiroshi? She asked, her voice breaking. I don't want to hurt anyone. I don't want to hurt anyone either, Ryota replied. But I can't ignore this. Their resolve crumbled as they shared another passionate kiss. From that moment, their affair began in earnest, a secret they vowed to keep hidden. The affair unfolded in stolen moments. Lunchtime coffee dates became their escape, and after-hours meetings turned into whispered confessions. Ryota sent Aiko subtle messages during work hours, each one quickening her pulse. At home, Aiko grew more distant. Hiroshi noticed, but assumed it was because of her busy schedule. He tried to reconnect, but Aiko's mind was elsewhere, consumed by the thrill of her secret life. The guilt was ever present, lurking in the background, but it was overshadowed by the exhilaration. For the first time in years, Aiko felt alive, desired, and free. Ryota suggested a business trip to Osaka as an excuse for them to spend time together. Aiko hesitated, but eventually agreed, convincing herself it was just one weekend. The trip was a whirlwind of emotions. Far from the prying eyes of the office and the constraints of their daily lives, Aiko and Ryota immersed themselves in their connection. They explored the city hand in hand, sharing meals and laughter as if they were a couple deeply in love. That night, in the privacy of their hotel room, their relationship became physical. It was tender and passionate. But as Aiko lay beside Ryota afterward, the weight of her choices pressed heavily on her. Upon returning to Tokyo, Aiko struggled to maintain composure. Hiroshi began asking more questions about her work trips and late nights, his suspicions growing. Are you happy, Aiko? He asked one evening, his voice tinged with sadness. The question caught her off guard. Of course, she lied, avoiding his gaze. At work, Ryota noticed her unease. We don't have to keep doing this, he said one day, sensing her internal conflict. But Aiko couldn't bring herself to let go. Despite the risks, the affair had become her escape, her refuge from the emptiness of her marriage. Rumors started circulating in the office about Aiko and Ryota. One afternoon, a colleague named Akiko approached Aiko. People are talking, she said, her voice filled with concern. About what? Aiko asked, pretending ignorance. You and Ryota, Akiko whispered, lowering her voice. Be careful. You know how gossip spreads here. Panic set in. Later that day, Aiko confronted Ryota. People are starting to notice, she said, her voice trembling. We need to be more careful. Ryota reassured her, but as Aiko looked into his eyes, she couldn't shake the feeling that their perfect little bubble was about to burst. Aiko tried to keep her life in balance, but cracks began to show. Hiroshi's growing suspicion manifested in subtle but pointed remarks. You're always so tired these days, he commented one night. Is work really that demanding? Aiko brushed it off, but the guilt continued to build. Meanwhile, Ryota seemed unfazed, dismissing her concerns about their affair being exposed. Let them talk, he said. It didn't alter what they had, but it did shift things. Aiko began to notice lingering glances from her colleagues and overheard hushed conversations as she passed by. Even Akiko's once warm demeanor grew distant, leaving Aiko feeling abandoned and exposed. One evening, as Aiko was tidying her desk, she came across an anonymous note. Everyone knows. Stop before it's too late. Hiroshi's anxiety reached a breaking point when he found a restaurant receipt in Aiko's bag. It was from a place he had never been to, dated during her supposed overtime. "What's this?" he asked, holding it up. Aiko froze. "Oh, that? It was a team dinner," she lied, her voice shaky. Hiroshi's gaze lingered on hers, but he chose not to question her further. That night, he stayed up late scrolling through Aiko's social media and even considered checking her phone. The man who once trusted her without question now felt betrayed, though he couldn't prove it yet. The tension reached a boiling point during a heated dinner at home. Hiroshi, visibly upset, finally voiced his concerns. "Aiko, are you seeing someone else?" he asked, his tone raw and direct. The question caught her off guard. For a moment, she considered denying everything, but the weight of her guilt made it impossible to meet his eyes. Why would you even think that? She tried to deflect, but Hiroshi wasn't fooled. "I'm not blind," he said, his voice cracking. "You've been distant, secretive. You're not the woman I married." Aiko felt her world crumble around her, but she couldn't bring herself to confess. Instead, she retreated to the bedroom, leaving Hiroshi alone with his doubts. At work, Ryota sensed Aiko's growing inner turmoil. During a private conversation, he suggested they take a break. "This is taking a toll on you," he said gently. "Maybe we should pause until things settle." But Aiko saw his words as self-serving. "A pause?" she repeated bitterly. "You mean until it's inconvenient for you?" Their argument escalated, revealing fractures in their once perfect bond. Aiko realized that while she had risked everything for Ryota, he wasn't willing to do the same. The allure of their forbidden romance began to fade, replaced by resentment and doubt. One fateful evening, Hiroshi's suspicions were confirmed. He followed Aiko after work and saw her meeting Ryota at a secluded cafe. The way they laughed, the way Ryota leaned in to touch her hand, it was all the proof Hiroshi needed. When Aiko returned home, Hiroshi was waiting for her. "I saw you," he said, his voice cold and distant. Aiko's heart sank. "Hiroshi, I can explain," she began, but he interrupted. "I don't want excuses. I want the truth." The confrontation became explosive, with Hiroshi demanding answers and Aiko breaking down in tears. For the first time, she confessed to the affair, her voice trembling with regret. Hiroshi left that night, unable to face her. She spent the night pacing the floor, replaying their argument in her mind. The next morning, Hiroshi returned with a suitcase, his expression grim. "I need time," he said flatly, refusing to meet her eyes. "You've broken something. I don't know if I can fix it." At work, things weren't any better. Rumors about her affair with Ryota had reached upper management, and both of them were summoned to a meeting. Ryota took the blame, resigning to protect Aiko's job, but the damage to her reputation had already been done. Alone in her apartment, Aiko struggled with the aftermath of her decisions. Hiroshi's absence left a void that nothing could fill, and the excitement of her affair with Ryota now felt hollow. She began reflecting on her marriage, how she and Hiroshi had drifted apart, and how she had allowed her loneliness to lead her astray. She also recognized her own failings, realizing she hadn't fought hard enough to repair their bond before seeking solace elsewhere. Determined to make amends, Aiko reached out to Hiroshi, asking for a chance to talk. Hiroshi agreed to meet her at a quiet park where they had once spent happy afternoons together. She apologized sincerely, taking full responsibility for her actions. "I know I hurt you," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want you to know how sorry I am." Hiroshi listened, his face unreadable. After a long silence, he spoke. "I need time to heal. I don't know if we can go back to how things were, but I appreciate your honesty." They parted ways, leaving their future uncertain. As for Ryota, he moved to a different city, leaving Aiko to rebuild her life alone. Though the affair had ended, its consequences lingered, serving as a painful reminder of the choices that had changed everything.